In this video, Dr. Jordan Peterson explains if there is another truth than the material truth, and he also talks about if we already come to this world with a pre-structured value system.
So, now, the final part of the argument is this. So then, what are we to regard as truth? Now, leave the materialist claims aside. I'm perfectly willing to say, and I think it would be ridiculous not to, that that's a form of truth that at least is very useful. So fine, it's a tool, and maybe more than that. Maybe it is saying something about the absolute nature of reality. I don't care about that. At least it's a useful tool for us. It's made us more powerful. But then we have this other problem, which is, well, what about the nature of the system that it's embedded in? Like, how do we determine its utility? Or how do we determine the utility of anything? Or how do we determine how to act? Or how do we determine what to value? And those questions can't be answered using the same methodology that science uses to answer its questions. Now, the consequence of that is what Nietzsche described at the end of the 1900s as the death of God, right? There's a conflict, a serious conflict between the claims of religion, which, as far as I'm concerned, have to do with value and morality, and the claims of science, which have to do with material reality. All right, so now, the tricky part comes in realizing that the selection mechanisms that determine what happens to you in relationship to the next generation, say, are selecting you on the basis of your action and your behavior. I would say they're selecting you on the basis of your values. So, because, you know, if you're an idiot, say, and you go charging after a lion and the lion eats you, then the nature of reality, so to speak, is rendered a judgment on the value structure that sent you down that particular path, right? And so, you're being selected by natural forces as a consequence of your behavior. Now, and then we can extend that argument, especially in the human case, or in the case of any organism that's also subject to sexual selection. And human beings are tremendously subject to sexual selection. Now, Darwin was a great believer in sexual selection. You know, he thought it was at least as important as the selection of the organism by the natural environment, whatever that is. But, you know, biologists really had a hard time with that, and they kind of ignored sexual selection for like 100 years, which is quite interesting. I think it was partly because sexual selection implies, especially when you're dealing with organisms that are sort of conscious like human beings, that choice itself is a determinant of evolutionary processes. And you know, the strict deterministic materialists didn't really like that, and they couldn't really come up with an argument against it, but they sort of shelved the whole topic for a very long period of time. But one of the things we know, for example, about human beings is that females are very sexually selective, female humans, as opposed, say, to female chimps, which aren't. And so part of the consequence of that is that you have twice as many female ancestors as you do male ancestors. Now, there'll be half of you who are going to have a hell of a time figuring out how that's possible, but it is possible. What it really means is that something like the average male who's in your ancestry had 2 children, if he had any, whereas the average woman had 1. And that'll do the trick right there, right? Now, I'm not saying those were the exact proportions, but those are the average proportions across huge spans of time. Now, so part of what's occurred to select human beings for the way they are is the choices that each gender has made with regards to action and belief, but in many ways, more specifically, female choices. So it's kind of interesting. The next time you're irritated at your boyfriend, let's say, then you can just remember that, you know, untold millions of women have chosen men so that they're exactly like he is. And so, you know, you can't really blame him for that. So, all right, so, but here's the thing that's tricky from a scientific perspective, eh? If it is your behavior and your value structures, if your value structures determine what you're interested in, how you behave, and selection pressure occurs as a consequence of your actions, then doesn't it mean that the structure of the value systems that drive your behavior have to be regarded as true or real in some scientific sense? Because the Darwinists basically say, look, the best solution is the solution that you embody. There is no higher solution than that. And there you are, embodying a solution. So in what way, I don't understand in what way that can't be regarded as real. You know, because people think of things like value structures as epiphenomenal. You know, they're not real like material is real. But I don't get that. I don't see how that works with Darwinian thinking, because you're interacting with each other all the time, and you're doing that on the basis of your capacity for action and the value systems that drive that. And obviously, those have some effect on whether or not you're selected by women, say, or by men for that matter, but also by the natural world. So, it looks to me, at least you can make a case, that the deep value structures that drive us, that are deep, deep parts of our psyche, and I'll try to also demonstrate to you that those exist beyond question. I already think that question is answered, but, you know, there's no blank slate theorists left, right? Everybody knows that you come into the world with an a priori structure. It's like that a priori structure was selected. So in what way is it not true? I could say, well, it's as true as it gets. Well, it's not true like a materialist idea, but that's okay. You don't have to have... First of all, I don't think the materialist ideas of truth are the most fundamental ideas, because, as I said, in order for that truth to be relevant, it has to be grounded in a value system. And so there's a value system outside of science that science serves. Otherwise, we'd be completely... It would be insane for us to pursue it, you know. If we knew that science was going to lead to the demise of everyone on Earth, which it could, we wouldn't be motivated to pursue it. If you knew that science was just going to increase your suffering, if you're a scientist, it's like, well, you'd stop doing it if you had any sense. So then I would say, well, we pursue materialist truths for reasons that are non-materialist, and those reasons are just as real as the materialist truths, but they're a different kind of true. They're a seriously different kind of true.